Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for another rag finery tutorial. This time we're going to be working on mending little holes on your sweaters. Take a moment to follow us on social media or visit our website. So this technique really works best for small moth-damaged holes, but you can use this to rebuild elbow holes. It just takes a bit more time and skill and attention. So when you find a hole, first thing you're going to do is grab a section of yarn that is about a similar thickness to your garment, but make sure you pick a needle that has a big eye and a blunt tip. Now stick your needle from the inside of your garment coming up to the outside, about 1/4 of an inch away from the hole. And that's just a guideline, but really you just want to make sure that you're stitching into structurally sound fabric in the beginning. You want to anchor your stitches in something that's not going to unravel. And leave a tail of about 4 inches on the reverse side of the garment, so inside. And if you've never done a duplicate stitch before, I recommend checking out a tutorial online first. But basically, you're just following the shape of the stitches. You can see here that I'm starting with my yarn at the base of a stitch. Then I stitch through the base of the stitch above. I'm just adjusting the tension there. I'll put my needle tip back into the base of the working stitch, and then up through the base of the adjacent stitch. Now up again through the legs of the stitch above. Now, if none of those words made any sense, here's a little infographic of what terminology I'm using. Legs are those parallel sections of yarn that form one complete loop, and we're wrapping our working yarn around the legs of the stitch above, and then going back into the base of the working stitch with our needle tip. So if we try to imagine what the yarn looks like with X-ray vision, it's going to be a series of interconnected serpentine lines. So actually the shape of our yarn is going to look pretty similar to this snake. Can you tell I'm using free line art software? Okay, now back to our sweater. Pretty soon I'm going to start fast forwarding, so you can just refer back to this initial section to get clarity. And when you get to the last stitch in the row, you'll jump up to the stitch above. It's hard to see with a fabric like this, but you'll go up into the base of the stitch above, pull the yarn all the way through, and do this the same way that you did the previous row, but this time we'll work the opposite direction. So around the legs of the stitch above, and then down into the base of the working stitch, coming up into the adjacent stitch, going around the legs of the stitch above, back into the base of the working stitch, and into the base of the adjacent stitch. Okay, and once you reach the hole, we're going to make a floating loop before entering the adjacent stitch. So it's not going to be anchored in the legs of an above row. Make sure you don't pull too tight or else your stitch will disappear. Also, you can adjust the tension of that loop with your needle tip. Or you can wrap it around a knitting needle to get a consistent size. We want it to be the same as the other stitches. Now, do you see what happens when I pull on that yarn? You need to keep an eye on those floating loops, because as you're stitching, you can actually make them shrink. So just pull out some slack by tugging on the loop. So we'll speed it up through this part and slow down when we get to that floating loop again. we reach our floating loop, we're going to enter with our needle point from back to front and then anchor in the legs of the stitch above. If it's a small enough hole that is feasible, you can stitch into that row above, but if you have a larger hole, then you might need to do a couple rows of floating loop stitches. And once you're done, just thread the yarn through to the other side. And here's what it looks like when you're all done with your patch. And notice how stretchy it is and how it blends in with the material. This makes it great for invisible mending and especially for elbow patches that need to bend and stretch a lot. Here's what it looks like on the reverse. Basically, you just created a bunch of purl stitches on the inside, and then you'll have some ends to weave in later. So here's what it looks like when you've got a couple of those patches on your favorite sweater. If you use this tutorial to help mend any of your garments, please send us a photo. We'd love to hear from you on social media, and thank you so much for joining us for this tutorial. See you next time.